Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. We are now 9.5 days into patch 3.21 and the Crucible expansion. I wanted to put together a quick overview of the meta that's been shaping up so far, what builds have been doing particularly well, what Ascendancies have overperformed, and which Ascendancies have underperformed as well. So let's have a quick look at that. But just firstly, some notes on the methodology we'll be using here. So Grinding Gear Games published the ladder. This is a list of all of the top 15,000 players at any given time by XP. Now this includes players unless they actively opt out by making their character private online. Now this information provides a fair bit of an overview as to what the most successful build archetypes are, but it's presented in a pretty clunky and awkward form. The website poe.ninja scrapes this data and then provides a whole lot of filtering tools so that you can have a look at the information you specifically want. Now, poe.ninja's aggregation improved out of sight this league. What they've done is they've made it so that players can attach their character to poe.ninja, even if they are not currently in the top 15,000 players by XP. And then poe.ninja will have a look at their character every time that it does an update to its ladder tracking. This is really significant because it now means there's a whole lot of data on people who are in the level 85 to 94 range, people who are not currently on the ladder, but where you can definitely see information on how they're going. That said, in order to keep in line with past practice on these videos, I am not going to pay attention to the characters that are outside the ladder at the moment. I want to look at the players who are level 95 and up, because adding the level 85 to 94 characters who have opted in adds a whole lot of biases to the data, and I'm just not sure that I can figure out ways to deal with that bias. For example, it's going to bias heavily towards English-speaking players, and that's going to have quite a bit of an impact on the data. But if you're interested in working out what builds are performing well, if there's a Korean language guide that's extremely popular and lots of people are following it, then actually you want to know about that as well. So for that reason, we're only going to be looking at the level 95 plus characters, but there is now information on level 85 to 94 if you're interested. Now, poe.ninja also aggregate data for the hard modes: hardcore, solo self-found, ruthless, or any combination of 2 or 3 of those game modes. I'm not really looking into those in this video, but each of the hard modes has its own quirks and definitely does change the meta. Harder game modes always constrain builds, and so you'll find there'll be more of a consolidation towards the proven strongest builds, as well as ones that play well with the specific mechanics of that specific hard mode. Now, it's worth saying there's a tiny number of people who play around with their build for a bit of a laugh. There are exactly 6 unascended shadows on the ladder at the moment. Now, that sort of thing happens, but it tends to be pretty limited and doesn't really affect the overall data because there's at least 15,000 characters on the ladder, so it doesn't really cause any major problems with the data. Were there to be 1,000 players who are messing around, then you'd start having some real problems. Okay, so let's have a look at the impact of some of 3.21's buffs and nerfs. The first one and the most noticeable is that Skin of the Lords and Skin of the Loyal have really fallen off in use, and that's because they are now much rarer than they used to be. This has also resulted in a substantial fall off in utilization of Empower support, because Empower support is far better in Skin of the Lords or Skin of the Loyal than it is in most other chess pieces you might use. This isn't, however, leading to a huge uptick in the utilization of other unique chests. There are some that are seeing an uptick. We're seeing more use of Hyri's Ire, more use of Kaom's Heart than in recent leagues. But instead, what we're seeing is an increase in the use of rare chests instead. Now, Lightning Coil is an exception here though. Lightning Coil is seeing a real resurgence in use this league. Now, this item was buffed a lot in 3.19, but has never really found a home since then. Now it seems that it's being used on chaos damage over time builds that just want to be tankier, and it is being used a lot there. It's now one of the top 10 used chests, which is something that hasn't been the case for a long time. Molten Shell was nerfed hard, and it's down from being used by a majority of the player base, 72% at this point in the Sanctum League, to just a plurality use, 47% of players using it. Molten Shell is still being used considerably more than using any other guard, or than using no guard. So at the moment we're at 47% using Molten Shell, 3% using Arcane Cloak, 15% using Steel Skin, 15% using Immortal Call, and 20% using no guard or using something else like the Necromancer's Bone Barrier. Also, the dedicated Trapper playstyle is pretty much dead except for Fire Trap. Trappers were a huge part of the meta until 3.20. There has been a calamitous drop off in that playstyle, and really it's just Fire Trap that is holding the torch for traps at the moment. A majority of saboteurs now are Hexblast miners, and we will come back to that build later because it is tremendously overperforming at the moment, being one of the top builds amongst level 100 characters. Now, a lot of players expected Heatshiver would get nerfed in availability to the point that it was similar to Skin of the Lords, Skin of the Loyal, but it was not. Heatshiver may have been nerfed in rarity to tier 3 from tier 4, but it's certainly not a very rare item now. It's pretty accessible, and people know this and are still building around it just as much as they did last league. It is still one of the most popular helmets to use on high level characters. Bow use is way up, from 18% to 25%, and bow skill choice has been very widely diversified. Last league, it was pretty much EA Ballista that was being played by bow users. Now that is still being played, but overwhelmingly people are on Vaal Lightning Arrow or Tornado Shot. There are plenty of other bow skills that are being used, those are just the top two. Vaal Reap and Vaal Ice Shot, among some of the new skills, are seeing some use, but they're certainly not tearing up the meta. They're definitely there, people are having fun with them, but they're not overperforming. There is almost no Vaal Firestorm, unfortunately. This is making me sad, and I think I should probably do something about this. Additionally, Aegis, Aurora and Soul Taker are far cheaper than they were last league, but this isn't really changing the meta very much. Soul Taker and the related unique Kingmaker not really being used very much as attack weapons, nor are we seeing a large increase in the amount of them that are flying around as Animate Guardians. Animate Guardian is still very much a niche skill, and so we're not really seeing much of an impact there from those uniques being made much more common this league. It's not that Aegis, Aurora and Soul Taker were made more common as direct drops, it's just that this is the league where it has been the most easy to generate any chanceable unique. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at the Ascendancy Spread, and Deadeye is the closest thing we have at the moment to a dominant Ascendancy. 17% of level 95 plus characters, 20% of level 100s. This is still a very high level of Ascendancy diversity though. We certainly aren't seeing any return to some of the low diversity leagues we had at 2019-2020 era, where, for example, in the most extreme case, I think we had more than 50% of people playing Necromancers in patch 3.8 for Blight, and 49% of people playing Slayers in 3.7 for Legion. Certainly nothing like that and nothing close to like that. Of those Deadeyes, 70% of them are using a bow, 22% are using claws, 5% are using a wand, so there's also a lot of diversity within the Deadeye Ascendancy. Those claw enjoyers are almost all Venom Gyre, but the people who are using bows are doing a bunch of different things with those bows. Now, Gladiator, Chieftain, and Assassin, these three Ascendancies have a problem. There are also a couple of other Ascendancies that are underperforming in softcore, trade-enabled, non-ruthless, but that do slightly better in the harder game modes. But Gladiator, Chieftain, and Assassin just aren't really doing well anywhere at the moment. Assassin is just outclassed by other Ascendancy choices, both for critical strikes and for poison. And Gladiator and Chieftain are outclassed by Juggernaut or Champion if you want to play a tanky build. And that's basically their identity. So those three Ascendancies need help. The other low performing ones are generally doing okay because they're at least best at something. Juggernaut, Pathfinder, Elementalist, Occultist, Necromancer, and Ascendant are all at least slightly overperforming the average, Juggernaut by quite a bit. And there's other Ascendancies like Champion that aren't overperforming the average, in fact they're underperforming the average, but they are very much the best at one particular thing. So Champions are what people play if they want to play a Corrupting Fever build, especially if they want it to be tanky. So yeah, other than Gladiator, Chieftain, and Assassin, everything has a home. Okay, let's have a look at the number one build of this league at the moment, and that is the Righteous Fire / Fire Trap combination. This is the top performing build at present. Doesn't necessarily make it the best build, it just means that it's a very solid one that has an excellent newer player friendly guide. And if you're looking for a guide to this, content creator Pox has an excellent one that is POHX. 88% of people playing this combination of skills are playing a Juggernaut, 9% are playing Inquisitor, and whilst there's only 2% Elementalist at the moment, I do expect this number to increase. This is because most people's advice to people who are considering running Elementalist Righteous Fire is hold off until you own the extremely expensive and extremely rare flask Oriath's End. This is something that only drops from the Uber version of Cirrus, and as a result, there's just not a huge number of them in the economy yet, although they're starting to become more available. Oriath's End is just so much better on the Elementalist version of Righteous Fire than it is on any other version, and as a result, this is something I think we will start to see more people pivoting towards. People who like the Righteous Fire playstyle will probably consider rolling their second character as an Elementalist once they're able to buy this flask, which cost me 17 divines when I bought it. Now, there's not many level 100s with this build. I think the main reason for this is that a lot of people start with Righteous Fire / Fire Trapper, And then once they've got a bit of currency behind them, they then respec into something that they want to play. So they play Righteous Fire because they know it's a proven starter, they know it's an excellent choice early, but then they actively look to respec out of it. That's my belief as to why it is that this build is not putting up huge numbers at level 100 at the moment. It is absolutely capable of taking you to level 100, it's just that most people don't want to play it all the way to 100. The next skill we want to look at is Lightning Arrow. Now, whether or not the build is optimizing the Vaal version or not, you probably want to use the Vaal version if you've got access to it, but whether you're optimizing around it or not, this is a Lightning Arrow build first and foremost. This is performing very well on Deadeye, which is 85% of Lightning Arrow players. It's also fine on Raider and Champion. The Vaal version is a real bonus to the build, but the main change that made this good was moving extra projectiles away from synthesized gear, which was extremely expensive and an extreme late game upgrade, and putting them into more accessible sources on the passive tree. The other thing that needs to be said is that Vengeant Cascade is incredibly powerful. Vengeant Cascade is one of the anoint only passives, and what it does is it causes projectiles to return to you and to pierce everything on their return back. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful. This is something that's incredibly powerful, and it's one of the things that helps make Vaal Lightning Arrow so popular, but also Vengeant Cascade needs a little bit more discussion because it's being played on a lot of other builds as well. So this notable is allocated or anointed by 12% of level 95 plus characters and 13% of level 100s. Of these, 58% are playing Lightning Arrow, 24% Artillery Ballista, we'll get to Artillery Ballista in a sec, 12% are playing Ice Shot, 9% are playing Frostblades, but then there's a huge swathe of other builds that are being empowered by this setup. Barrage, Kinetic Blast, Spectral Shield Throw, Molten Strike, Siege Ballista, Lightning Strike, Power Siphon, Scourge Arrow, Elemental Hit. Those are just the ones that are performing best. So there is a huge number of builds that are using this powerful anoint. Boneshatter is the next build we want to have a look at quickly. 71% of people who are playing this are playing a Juggernaut, 28% are playing a Slayer. This actually biases towards the Slayer when you look only at level 100s, so 35% of level 100 Boneshatter players are playing a Slayer, and I suspect that comes down to Slayers just generally being a slightly faster clearing build. Almost universally, people who are playing Boneshatter are using a two-handed rare axe. Atsury's Disfavor and Kingmaker are seeing a small amount of use here, but overwhelmingly people are using rare axes. Now, the unique gloves Tanu Ahi that were added in this patch are incredibly good on the Juggernaut version of Boneshatter. They're a terrible choice on the Slayer version because they run into conflict with the Slayer's overleach mechanic, but on the Juggernaut, they provide a tremendously high uptime of both Adrenaline and Onslaught for the glove slot. Whilst the glove slot is extremely, extremely competitive, Tanu Ahi is the reason it's so competitive. It is just such a powerful set of gloves, and these are being used more and more every day as we go on. This also is a very cheap item. Tanu Ahi is extremely cheap at the moment. I was expecting this to be a tier 1 rarity unique when it was first spoiled. Instead, it seems like it's tier 5. It seems like it's one of the most common uniques in the game, and it is just incredibly powerful. If you attack 5 times a second, you'll have more than 70% uptime on Adrenaline with these gloves alone, and you'll also have something like 85% uptime on Onslaught, which is just fantastic for the glove slot. Now, Juggernaut versions of this build like the Brass Dome, but it's far from universal, and Divergent Boneshatter is one subset of Boneshatter builds that kind of needs to be considered its own build. This is almost always using Juggernaut, and Divergent Boneshatter is a very, very different setup entirely, as you need to be able to mitigate much more self-damage than the base version of Boneshatter does. All in all though, Boneshatter is the best of the melee builds by quite a way, and it's performing extremely well this league. The next build we want to look at is Tornado Shot. Now, I'm going to separate out builds that are primarily killing monsters with Corrupting Fever. I'm not going to consider those to be a traditional Tornado Shot build. Amongst the builds that are actually killing things with Tornado Shot, we're looking at 76% Deadeye, 20% Pathfinder. Now, these are usually played as a tri-element setup that use Trinity support, although that is not the only way that you can play Tornado Shot. Tornado Shot can be done as a direct attack or as a totem attack. Now, this skill is extremely common on level 100s, and one of the reasons for this is that Tornado Shot is one of the best skills if you have an external Aura bot supporting you. If you've got an Aura bot, all you really need to do is focus on hitting as much of the screen as possible with every shot, and Tornado Shot does this incredibly well. Then let the Aura bot supply all of the damage for you through auras like Hatred, Wrath, Anger, and more. There is no single agreed upon best Tornado Shot build. There is a lot of diversity within the archetype of Tornado Shot. Next, I want to talk about Artillery Ballista, one of the highest performing skills, but it's worth saying that this is often the same people who are playing Lightning Arrow or the same people who are playing Tornado Shot. 72% of people using Artillery Ballista as a primary skill are Deadeyes, 15% Raiders, 11% Pathfinders. Seldom used alone, this is a support setup that is used to shore up weaknesses on bow builds, but it is used a lot. And so while these Artillery Ballista builds are also Vaal Lightning Arrow or Tornado Shot builds, the skill is used so much that I need to mention it here because it is a top 5 skill this league. Next we have the Dark Horse. This is the Hexblast Miner, and this has been massively overperforming expectations. This is played on both the Saboteur, 79%, and the Occultist, 17%, and it is actually the 4th most played build if you restrict to only looking at level 100 characters. Of all the builds that I looked at, this is the one that had the highest percentage of people who make it to 95, also then pushing to level 100. So this certainly outperformed my expectations, and my expectations for this build were not low. Fascinatingly, there's a lot of people using Hexblast Mines with Kaom's Heart, an item that really had been feeling like a bit of a has-been in Path of Exile. It seems like it's got a new lease of life, and a large majority of the people who are using Kaom's Heart on level 95 plus characters are using a Hexblast Miner. I want to just finish with some other breakout uniques, and Taste of Hate and Kaom's Spirit are seeing quite a bit more use in this league than they did in Sanctum. It's not they weren't used in Sanctum, they were both used quite a bit, but they have definitely ticked up in use. Darkness Enthroned use is way up, and this is because of the Abyss overhaul. This belt was already very good, but it's only been made better by the Abyss overhaul. Devouring Diadem use, interestingly, is way down. Now this is more so than you would expect from its increased price. For those of you that didn't notice, Devouring Diadem had its drop location swapped with Kane of Kulamak. So Kane of Kulamak is now available from low-level Katarina fights. Devouring Diadem is now exclusive to high-level ones. This meant that there's a lot less Devouring Diadems on the market than there've been in the past. However, Devouring Diadem is not a staggeringly expensive item at the moment. It's about 3 Divine Orbs, so it's not cheap, but it's not something that is phenomenally expensive either. And when you're talking level 95 plus players, they can afford a Devouring Diadem at 3 Divines. However, not many of them are interested in using it. What I suspect has happened here is that Devouring Diadem, people speculated it was going to be nerfed more than it was in availability. And so I suspect a number of people have decided they wanted to just wait and see. They're playing a build that doesn't rely upon it early, and that their plan was, we'll wait and see how rare it is, and then if it turns out that it's accessible, maybe I'll use it on my second character, rather than planning a first character that needs it. That's my speculation there, but Devouring Diadem use is way down, far, far, far more than its price point would make you expect. For example, more expensive items like Ashes of the Stars and the Covenant are being used on 5% of high-level characters, whereas only 2% of the meta are using Devouring Diadem. So that's something that's quite interesting. And finally, Kaom's Heart use is way up this league. It's gone from being a complete has-been item to something that is making quite the resurgence, and the reason for that is the Hexblast miners. Those people are everywhere, and the ones that are using Kaom's Heart seem to be doing pretty well. Anyways, that's the meta wrap up for day 10. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.